Awesome. Great.
There we go.
So like I said, today's meeting shouldn't take more than an hour, since we're gonna have that secondary meeting on July 17th, a little more as we get into this, where we'll dive a little more into the selection criteria and prioritization. So today we're kind of seeing this more as just a real introductory review of the LWAP process, and for Patrick and Gabrielle to talk about the data library, give you an introduction to that, and have a chance for you guys to ask questions. So the location for July 17th is still to be determined, but that'll be exciting, more of like a work meeting. And we're hoping to do that. We're planning on doing it in person, probably not with a hybrid option. All right. Can you guys all hear me okay?
You're going back and forth, in and out.
Oh, should I be? You can't quite hear me well. Should I get closer, Patrick? To hear it? Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So today we're just going to go over what is an LWAP, talk about roles and introduce members of the team, go over the work plan and the timeline, and then Patrick's going to introduce you to the data library, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. So what is an LWAP? Hopefully you guys saw that great article that Allison Marcioni wrote, and I think it got passed around, but I'll also include that in my follow-up email after this meeting. But the way it makes sense to me is to see it sort of as a tool, a process, and a report. Ultimately, it's considered an assessment and planning tool that's identifying what the current threats are in the lake ecosystem. You guys mostly probably already know a lot of this, what those stressors and current conditions are, like stormwater runoff, sedimentation, and erosion. The process is about a 2-year process to come up with this action plan. So it includes mostly assessments and, of course, your community input. And then it ends with the LWAP final report, which will be a guide with actionable items. Awesome. Basically, the objective stated by the Vermont DEC is basically that we need to create this final report, but it's really, again, to really emphasize it's not just another plan. That both MWA and the district are prepared to help really, this implementation phase after these projects are prioritized and identified. So, and the other key, objective for the DEC is that we really involve the community. And we look forward to any ways that you guys can help us understand how to best engage. We're supposed to come up with, provide a map of the sedimentation and phosphorus load, and basically identify and prioritize a set of projects. So it's up to 60 at Willoughby. The other outcomes and deliverables are doing these lake shoreline and lake-wise assessments, creating this digital watershed data library. And then part of the plan is having a preliminary 30% restoration design and cost estimate for 3 projects. That we're hoping that Patrick will kind of articulate that a little bit better, what that actually really means, because I'm still learning too. So the roles, so basically the LWAP team, or the leadership team, the project managers, is the Orleans County District and MWA. So basically the district is seen as the local service provider, project leader, organizer, point of contact. That's essentially going to be me, and provide, working on this outreach, trying to really include as many people as possible. And then my colleague Abraham Ames, who is on the call as well, I'll have him introduce himself at some point. He will be leading a lot of the lake shoreline restoration assessments and work and partnership. And then MWA will be Patrick and Gabrielle, who will introduce themselves shortly. And again, they'll be doing this digital watershed data library, doing these, articulating what these core assessment areas are, performing the stream assessments, and developing and prioritizing methods, and identifying these water quality projects and initial designs. And then, of course, we're partnering with the Vermont Watershed Management Division, Ben and Allison, I think you guys both know. So they oversee us all. And then the stakeholders. So we're really hoping that some of you can become a part of this key team. you guys have sort of identified key people from your lake associations, but we're open to hearing from other people, environmentalists, community members, town officials that you think really should help us with these kind of key decision making and you know, being our advisors. The next layer of stakeholders is just, you know, who else just kind of needs to be informed. Maybe they don't want to be heavily engaged, but that town staff and lake association membership that wants to know what's going on. And then there's just the greater community stakeholders. So how do we really engage the greater public, those lake users, other residents that aren't necessarily own property on the lakes, and other environmentalists. So we welcome your help with helping us find those people for sure. So the work plan, again, it's basically a 2-year process, and I will create a handout for this and email that to you guys in a follow-up. So again, if I don't have your email, if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. So in 2023, basically summer and fall, we'll be building the team, having our meetings. The next one being on July 17th, we'll really start to look at the data library and get your input on this prioritization criteria and start doing the lake, shoreline, and lake-wise assessments. And then in 2024, we'll be doing more of the road and stream assessments, project scoping, and the initial restoration plans for the 3 projects, and creating the final report that we present to the community. And then again, we don't want it just to be a plan. So 2025 and beyond, you know, working with MWA and the district to implement these priority projects by accessing grant funding, helping, working together to do that. And now I'm going to hand it over to Patrick and Gabrielle, who's going first. They will introduce themselves.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. It's nice to see this many faces. Obviously, it's not super largely high populated areas, but this shows that a lot of people have vested interest in the lakes, and that's all we can hope for in the whole process, because otherwise it's just a few of us operating in a black box. So we really appreciate stakeholder input. We really appreciate eyes on the ground. And so not so much of this meeting, but the public meeting in July will be giving you all an opportunity to look at a map in person and with a pen and a pad and be able to point out particular areas that you may have concerns for on the ground that we can evaluate as part of our assessments. But for now, so you know who I am. My name is Patrick Curley. I work for the Memphremagog Watershed Association as a project manager. I live in Newport, been working in water quality for about 12 years. And Gabrielle here is a recent hire at MWA. She's coming from Derby tonight. So you've got a handful of local yokels or wannabe local yokels that are really excited to work on your lakes. We've been introduced to the LWAP process through our work on the Willoughby Lake Watershed Action Plan, and we're excited to take what we've learned from that endeavor and apply it to Echo and Seymour Lake. So the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you what you probably already know about your own lake. So forgive me if I sound, you know, like I'm preaching to the choir, but you know, I think it'd be nice to get everybody a little well-rounded background information regarding the setting. I really wish I could make this little header disappear. Wait, here we go.
Do you see that?
All right, floating. There we go. Okay.
Great.
So you got a decent sized watershed, about 15,000 acres, and 13,000 of those drain to Seymour Lake, which then, as you know, drains into Echo Lake. There's also about 2,200 acres that drain directly to Echo Lake. So there are areas in the watershed that do not actually flow into Seymour before getting to Echo Lake. Quite a size difference, as you can tell, between the two lakes. Seymour is about 3 times the size and a little bit deeper. You also have 27 miles of streams that are perennial streams that are mapped, and I would say maybe double or triple that of you know, intermittent or ephemeral streams, I like to call them. And fortunately for the watershed, you have a lot of trees and water, which are usually beneficial to water quality, like we would expect. 83% forested in the entire watershed, which is a great number. Don't change a thing. You're doing wonderful with your tree canopy coverage. There's not a ton of impervious surfaces. And when we talk about impervious surfaces, we talk about essentially ground covers that don't allow water to infiltrate. So think, roads, rooftops, parking lots, buildings, pavement, even gravel, hard packed gravel roads, those are considered impervious. They don't allow water to sink or infiltrate into the ground. They allow runoff to, shed off the landscape at a faster rate and carry pollutants with them. So a lot of the LWAP process really focuses in areas that have high impervious coverage. So things like roads, things like heavily developed shorelands, things like parking lots, is what we're really going to kind of hone in on initially to see, okay, where are there opportunities to catch some of that water, that runoff, and retain some of those nutrients and some of that sediment from entering your lakes. An interesting thing is that, the lakes look a lot different from above, but when you look at the shoreline, the 250-foot shoreline, you're very similar. So we go from 83% forested down to 55% on Echo Lake, with about 6 acres of impervious. But when you look at Seymour Lake, it's about the same. You still got 53% forested along your shoreline. So about half of it's forested, half of it's developed. And right out the gate, we could recommend, encourage both communities to try to stay at that number. It'd be great to raise that number a little bit, but obviously it's challenging with development pressure and people wanting to do what they want to do in the lakeshore. But what we recommend, overarching every recommendation, is keep that multi-story canopy, that tree canopy, intact, because it's one of the easiest ways to maintain lakes. We talk a little bit about water quality, based on some of the data that the state has collected over the past years and some of the data that you all have been involved in collecting over the past years as well. In Echo Lake, the general trend is not too alarming. You don't have any sort of significant negative trend or increase in phosphorus concentration in the spring, although there is a significant increase for the past 20 years in summer phosphorus concentrations, which I'm sure brings a lot of you to this meeting tonight with your worries about water quality as well as invasive species and algae blooms. And some of the numbers that we see for phosphorus are actually quite encouraging. For the spring, we got this number down here, and the average is over 17 years, 8 micrograms per liter. That's parts per billion. That's really low. That's below the threshold for an oligotrophic lake, which is what you would consider like a low nutrient lake. So that's a really good number to be hitting. It's unfortunate that the number is rising, but I think with all these brains in the room, we might be able to get that number to start ticking down over the next couple of years. Summer phosphorus is a little bit higher, but not an alarming amount. And then Secchi disc, you can also see a graph of that in the lower left-hand corner. Essentially a metric of water clarity. You put this circular crosshatch down from the surface, and as soon as it disappears out of view, you measure the depth, and that gives you a sense of how clear the water is. And then summer chlorophyll A, that's a measurement of algal concentration, so how much green stuff is growing in the water column, not vegetation on the bottom, but algae floating around the water column. And for both those metrics, you're in the clear at Echo Lake. There's not any significant trend. It's pretty stable appearing, and it is in a good range for maintaining that oligotrophic lake status. Seymour's similar, a little bit different. You don't have really any significant trends for water quality, for spring or summer phosphorus. They're both at about 8.5 parts per billion with over 21 or 26 years, which is really low. You guys have really good phosphorus concentration. A little bit deeper Secchi disc, although that does have a significantly decreasing trend over 45 years about. 8 meters is pretty deep. You can see 8 meters, you're seeing pretty deep, although it is, not alarm, raising an alarm, but it is interesting to see that trend increasing, particularly when you look at the trend for chlorophyll, which is decreasing. So you would think if your clarity is decreasing, your chlorophyll concentration would be increasing. All that algae would be obscuring the water column, but it's not the case. So then you start scratching your head. You're like, oh, well, maybe perhaps it's turbidity, but I don't think there's all that conclusive data on turbidity either. So it's a little, perplexing as to what might be controlling some of that water clarity and chlorophyllite concentration trend. But ultimately, you guys are in good shape. Obviously, you see some spikes over the years, but in total, the lake water is pretty darn clean. When you start talking about the tributaries feeding into the lakes, you get a little bit more variability over the past, what I can tell, 15 years. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this La Rosa program stopped in 2018 in Seymour. And I see Peggy shaking her head, so it looks like I'm not entirely false on that. If there is any other information, we'll give you our contact info, and we'd love to hear about what you all have been up to. But ultimately, we get a little bit larger phosphorus concentration coming in from the streams, which is completely to be expected. Some of the brooks to the north are up in like the high 20 parts per billion on average, with spikes up to like 125, 130 parts per billion, which is that's cause for concern, because those are pretty high numbers. So then you start looking at, okay, what's the land use going on? Has there been a lot of development pressure? Has there been some sort of, unintentional discharge of agricultural waste? So this information really helps us to hone in, okay, where should we start looking? What streams should we start walking? What drainages might be providing more of the input of sediment and phosphorus? I think what's really interesting to see is you do have some tributaries that are a little less developed, particularly east side tributary, with really low average phosphorus concentrations. And 11.6 parts per billion is great. I mean, if all the tribs were feeding in at that level of phosphorus, we wouldn't probably have much of a concern, because once that water's in the lake, there's algae that's uptaking the phosphorus. There's actual sedimentation processes that are trapping that phosphorus in the bottom of the lake. Fish are made of fatty tissue, which is a lot of phosphorus, and so that can cycle a lot of the phosphorus out of the water column, store it in, whether it's in the sediments or in fish tissue, and that can be an important kind of component, an important storage compartment of phosphorus. As I mentioned, the highest observation was in Sucker Brook, 127 parts per billion. Good news, I'm sure some of you are aware, there is a restoration project going on Valley Brook, north of, to the west of Sucker Brook this summer, which should help to address some of those issues. And then nitrogen is another metric that isn't as big of a concern for all of us, but it's interesting to see this huge range in nitrogen concentrations, which when looked in comparison to phosphorus, they really have these kind of push and pull dynamics. The more nitrogen you have, the more limiting phosphorus becomes. And so that's when the cyanobacteria can really kind of take hold. If they have abundant nitrogen and if they have abundant phosphorus, only a little bit of nitrogen, they can still make a living. So there are a lot of dynamics going back and forth. And to be perfectly honest, 3.9 milligrams per liter is a lot of nitrogen. So that's something that we're interested in looking at. Why might that be so higher than the other tributaries? In terms of chloride, chloride is often found in road salts, also often found in wastewater. Your levels are not concerning. I think the water quality standard for Vermont is up like 200 milligrams per liter or parts per million. You guys are down in the 2 to 3 range, so not something that we're concerned about. When you're talking about echo, similar kind of numbers. To be honest, we see 6 tributaries monitored over the last couple of years. Concentrations around 30% or 30 parts per billion in some of the brooks that had higher concentrations. But when you look at, for instance, the Echo Lake Inlet, so this is the outflow from Seymour coming into Echo Lake, we're hitting 8 parts per billion again. That is a really good number. Everybody should be striving for that number all over the place. You got peaks of 82 parts per billion on Anderson Brook. Not as wild of a range for nitrogen, anywhere from 200 parts per billion to 1 part per million. Not cause for alarms. You got a little bit more chloride spikes coming in from the tributary off Winnipie Hill Road. but again, way below the water quality threshold for the state. And we have noticed that your monitoring is really well timed in terms of like precipitation events. And we do see these spikes that, might be attributed to like late June thunderstorms where there might have been a dry spell, a bunch of silt built up or a bunch of, sediment hasn't moved in a while, and you get a 2-inch rainstorm and it mobilizes and you see these little spikes. So all that said, a lot of you are probably familiar with this information. We've got it summarized here. There's a lot more kind of, when you look outside of just the average, a lot more information that we can kind of tap into, point us in the right direction as to what tributaries that we should be looking at for the largest contributors of sediment and phosphorus. We also look at roads, and there are not a ton of roads in this watershed, which is a good thing for water quality. And there are about 52 miles of roads. Over half of them are owned by the towns. About a third of them are privately owned, and only a small sliver of them are state owned. So the state roads, they have their own stormwater requirements and permit programs. And so that's not really in the scope of work that we have for the Lake Watershed Action Plan. If we see like an egregious problem, we can flag it, we can call it a priority, but we're not in the business of evaluating V-Trans roads. This is really focused on those town roads and those private roads where we might be able to have a greater influence and projects that are a little bit more cost effective. Big state highway projects are often really expensive and they've got their own requirements to meet. So it's not really our responsibility to keep them up to snuff. So we really focus on those municipal roads, private roads that are a little bit harder to fund, may need a little bit more creative thinking or matching funds from different sources to pay for these projects. So we look at things like road erosion risk scoring. So this has been done for all municipal roads where I think it was done by the Northeastern Vermont Development Association over the past 20 years, but essentially in the entire watershed, there's only 2 segments that are like high risk for erosion. So we'll look at those. We'll look at the moderate risk. There's about 20 segments of those. We'll look at some of the low risk sites, primarily based on other factors that we identify, like stream crossing, where we'll be like, hey, this segment drains straight into Sucker Brook or right into the East Tributary. Let's try to address some of those. And then we also use some of the MRGP, the Municipal Roads General Permit Program, to identify other segments of road that may not have been assessed for road erosion risk or may have had some sort of alteration since those assessments have been performed to help us figure out exactly where it needs to be done. And some of this work has already kind of started, for instance, like East Echo Lake Road. So all the data out there is available. We'll show you how you can peruse through it in a short moment. One thing I really want to stress is there are 32 miles of private driveways in this watershed. That is more than half of the public roads. And so I think this is a really big challenge for both watersheds, because not only are some of these roads owned by 6, 10, 12 people, or at least right of ways for that many properties through a private road, they're also usually right smack on the side of the lake, and they're often really steep and not well built. So that's something that I think is going to flush out as to be one of the biggest, opportunities in the watershed, is dealing with private roads. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be hard because you might only get a 500-foot driveway. That's a big problem, and it's not very cost effective to fix a 500-foot driveway over a 2,000-foot public road. So we're going to have to work through some of these challenges. But I think one opportunity for the watershed, particularly lake associations, is to really dive into those private roads and driveways and figure like, okay, we should get a social marketing campaign that teach people how to manage their driveways appropriately. We look at stream crossings. You got 413 culverts in the watershed. That's a lot of culverts. Most of them are in good shape. Some of them are in terrible shape. We're going to find them. You've got some stream crossings, so culverts that have been assessed for their geomorphic compatibility. That's essentially, are they properly sized for the stream? Only, 26 or so have been assessed. So as we walk streams, as we walk roads, and we find culverts, we take note of that. We notice like, well, that stream's 6 feet wide, but that culvert's only 18 inches. And that's where you start to find problems where culverts get overwhelmed, they clog, they plug up, the stream fills up, and then it blows out a room, for instance. That's a big episodic release of sediment and phosphorus that we'd like to avoid by fixing and replacing undersized culverts. The other part about culverts is fish need to get through them. And again, we've only got 25 culverts that have been evaluated for fish, and most of them are not passable for fish. So we'd love to fix that. We got to figure out where are we going to get the most bang for buck. If we replace this culvert, we want it to open up miles of headwater stream above it. We don't want to open up a culvert that drains in, that then flows, or that is receiving water from somebody's private pond that isn't really fish habitat. We're not going to spend money on that. We're not going to recommend that. So these are the sorts of things that we're looking at. Trying to get these interdisciplinary projects that reduce phosphorus, reduce sediment, but also provide better habitat for both the lakeshore and the streams. There's a lot of other data that we look through, whether it's a course screening or whether we really drive into a project that we're developing and designing. Things like potentially erosive features, you can think of that as like gullies or washouts or steep erosive, landforms, hydric soils. So that's essentially, synonymous more or less with wetlands. If this is a hydric soil, it might support a wetland. It's also very closely linked to soil erodibility. And soil erodibility is very closely linked to phosphorus concentration in the soil and how much potential that has to deliver phosphorus through erosion. So we look at these sorts of things. We look at protected lands and we look at enrollment and current use, because if a property has a conservation easement on them, they might not know about an opportunity, and that might be really easy to get funding for a conserved property, particularly if it's state-owned or if it's like a Vermont land trust property. The other thing with current use is people have forest management plans and they have agricultural properties. Both of those programs have these sorts of standards that you need to follow. And if we find a forest property that has a management plan and they don't know that they've got this forest trail washout, we can tap into those programs. We can align partners and different funding opportunities to address those issues and those concerns. So we look at a lot of different things. Gabby's going to tell you a little bit more, and then she's going to show you a neat little tool that we have online that you all can use on your free time. And I know you're going to spend hours moving around this map. She's going to show you how to get there.
Yeah, so we just have a few more slides to get through before we get to the map. I will go over some vegetation for Echo Lake. A lot of normal species you'd find in a lake, a lot of pond weeds and elodias and horsetails and stuff like that. One issue that we do have are Phragmites, or the common reed, that has been documented there. And you can see where the earliest record is and most recent record. I'm sure there's more recent records than that as well. And then a yellow loosestrife is another invasive species that has been documented in Echo Lake as well. Did you want to go to the next one? Thank you. Seymour Lake vegetation, kind of similar species, lots of pondweed, lots of things you expect in a lake. They do have Eurasian milfoil in the lake that has been documented, as well as purple loosestrife. So watch out for those invasives. And then a neat thing in Seymour Lake is there is a state rare species, an S2G5 species, just titles, that is the American shore grass species, a little rhizomatous species that'll kind of like take over shorelands, and it is native, so very good. So that's just a really neat thing that is special about Lake Seymour. We're going to go over a little bit about the fisheries in Seymour Lake and Echo, starting with Seymour. We've got an abundance of fish. You can see there's a lot of species. The four main species are the native lake trout that are self-sustaining, the brown trout that are also native and self-sustaining. That just means that we don't stock them. They're populating on their own and doing just fine, without us interfering. And then also there are stocked landlocked Atlantic salmon and rainbow smelt, which are non-native. An interesting thing that we found from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife data that we received is that the mean length of native lake trout and the relative weight may be decreasing over time. And you can kind of see this in the graphic on the side. And then we're also noticing that overall abundance is increasing through those trends and the data collected there. And there's just a little bit of a paraphrased statement at the bottom kind of suggesting that as well. And then And then for the Echo Lake fisheries, we've also got some of the same fish species like the lake trout that are native and self-sustaining. We found out from some data from Vermont Fish and Wildlife that their mean length may be increasing while their mean weight may be decreasing over time. And you can see that in those graphs on the side. And then also they have native self-sustaining brown trout, landlocked Atlantic salmon that are stocked, and stocked rainbow trout that are not native, as well as a few other species like the burbot, the smallmouth bass, rock bass, and white suckers. Got a handful of rare, threatened, and uncommon species in both the basin, well, in Seymour Basin, and a significant natural community that it has been designated. That is the northern white cedar swamp. I think that's mud pond up there. When in doubt, every pond is a mud pond. And then we also have in Seymour Lake plant and animal that is rare, threatened, or uncommon. That plant that we talked about earlier, the American shoregrass, that is the orange dot there in the middle. And then the animal species is not for specific reasons. We were not able to get any of the data on that, and that's just to protect the species so that there is no illegal harvest of those species, or we don't want to impact them too much. So really cool things hanging out in there. And then depending on the projects that we get going from identification here, we have a few different opportunities for funding. So you can see across the top, we have different parts of our project phases. We've got project development, design, implementation, and operations and maintenance. And you can kind of see where the different types of funding opportunities fall under that. So for the Clean Water Service Provider Formula grants, those we can fund projects from project development through operations and maintenance. Other opportunities that we might be able to take on, depending on the project again, is WUV project development block grants for project development, and the design implementation block grants, and woody buffer block grants through WUV as well. Those do design and implementation projects. And then last, we've got the DEC watershed enhancement grants, where we can utilize those funds for design through operations and maintenance. And then VT Trees for Streams program, that's for putting streams along riparian areas, and that's for design and implementation. And lastly, we've got CREP, our Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, that focuses on a lot of agricultural properties. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions? I know we kind of cruised through all of those slides pretty quickly.
Yeah, we can definitely take a moment for questions, and then
let's do general questions for you guys.
Yeah.
For your content.
Peggy, I see a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that you would identify 3 projects. Is that 3 shoreland projects, 3 road projects, and 3, what am I missing, tributary projects?
Great question. So we identified hopefully dozens and dozens of projects through the process of identification and then community input, prioritization based on a whole slew of factors, which you'll learn about in July. We then design 30% plans for 3 projects. And those could all be 3 shoreland projects, or they could be a mix of shore, stream, and road, stormwater, developed lands, agriculture. So essentially what we do is we go out and scour the landscape, and we look for opportunities. We evaluate those opportunities based on their potential to improve water quality, their cost effectiveness. And then our team, Bevan, myself, Abraham, and Gabrielle, and with input from DEC, are going to essentially make recommendations to the community, to the lake associations and the public. And with that feedback, we then select 3 projects to design. And then we get you a design that hopefully, in an ideal situation, either Orleans County Conservation District or Memphis Watershed Association then facilitates through 100% design and implementation following the LWAP.
So I'm still learning.
Thank you. Is that 3 per the whole watershed or 3 per lake?
3 for the whole watershed. So that's something where, that number is not necessarily set in stone. If we have 3 smaller projects and we could potentially do maybe 5 smaller projects, or, you know, 1 big one and 3 small ones. You know, that can be sorted out later. Essentially, what it comes down to is, you know, we certainly want to balance both lakes. You know, we don't want to be heavily skewed one versus the other, but we do have to take into consideration like the cost effectiveness, because say, for instance, an expensive but very valuable project is done in Seymour. In theory, those benefits should trickle down to Echo, but the reverse isn't necessarily true. If we do a project in Echo, Seymour is not going to see that. So we really are going to rely on you all to help us meet that fairness.
So I think, because I'm still trying to learn all this too and understand it, I think it just means that as a part of the LWAP, this initial process, that you're getting 3 projects already into the design phase. There could be many, many more. It's just that 3 are included in this package.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. So Bevan kind of just said this, but I wanted to clarify as we were talking that with the LWAP, it's going to fund 3 projects, but that's not the end of our involvement. All the projects which are identified, we would potentially pursue through other funds, but the LWAP itself is going to include 3. But really the partnership is going to be ongoing from there, and this is just the beginning.
Awesome. Yeah. And introduce yourself, Abraham.
Thanks, Bevan. Hi, I'm Abraham Ames. I work for the Orleans County Conservation District. So I'm going to be managing the lakeshore assessments and then lakeshore projects. And while I have the floor, I want to throw out there too, just from doing a couple of LWAPs now, I just want to say that the community involvement is really key. And the way that the community is involved with the process really affects the way that it goes. So we would love, as much as you guys want to be involved, please engage with us. Because, you know, we have like a lot of things going, but you guys have the local knowledge and the local connections. So with your help, this will go a lot further than just us working on it. So please see this as a partnership.
Thanks, Abraham. Very well said.
you.
So we've got essentially 15 minutes if we do want to keep it to an hour. Ben, and would you like to introduce yourself, or do you have anything you need to? Oh, he might be gone.
He was losing service.
We may have lost. Oh, yeah, there's more people.
If Ben
Ben?
isn't available, I do want to give Meg a chance.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting.
Meg, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
And Meg, yeah, we are also going to be working with Northwoods on the road assessment. So Meg, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and chime in about that, since you're more experienced with it than I am.
Sure, yeah. I'm Meg Carter. I'm the Conservation Science Director at the Northwoods Stewardship Center. We have experience doing Class 4 road erosion inventories, and I think the part of this that will be involved in mostly is having some of our staff, some of our seasonal staff next summer go out and help do some of the private road assessments. We're also a large landowner on Echo Lake, so we definitely are very interested in making sure that the water quality in this watershed is as good as it can be, because we benefit from it as well.
I think a really important thing that we just want to stress that you're getting 3 local partners in these organizations, and we're not going to give you this document. The next project that's up to bid. You know, we're here for the long haul, and so we'd really like to see the continuity of the work be, you know, kind of the priority in from the outset. You know, we want to develop these projects so that they make sense to use our partners to tap into grants, to design the projects where we can, to implement the projects where we can, to work with the landowners and the stakeholders that we already know and that we want to continue working with. So we hope that you all, you know, recognize that and look forward to, you know, kind of rolling up your sleeves a little bit. So Ben, did you have a chance to chime in, or it sounds like you might be losing some connectivity? Okay, so we're gonna show you our neat web map. Gabrielle, if you have sharing privilege, you can pull that up.
Host disabled the participant screen sharing. Do you mind pulling it up?
Yeah, how do I do that? Swear I've done this 100 times, but it never gets any easier.
Wait, she can't.
Right, especially going from Teams to Zoom.
There.
Yeah. Can I share her screen?
Advanced sharing options. All participants. All
There we
right,
go.
roll
Let's do
away.
it. Great, thank you. All right, sharing. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So Bevan is going to put a link to this data library that we created in the chat. And then we're also going to email it, I believe, to the email list. If you guys have provided your emails, this will be a direct link to this data library map on ArcGIS Online. You don't have to have an account to view this at all. It's a public map, so don't worry. You don't have to like set anything up at all. You just click the link and it'll pull right up immediately. So once you click the link, this is actually what it shows immediately. We've got a few.
Share.
Uh-oh.
What's up?
You forgot to share.
Is she sharing or are you sharing?
Have you
it-
shared? Have you shared your screen?
Yeah, I
can't-
did.
Can
You are
guys-
screen sharing.
Oh,
I'm
there
sorry.
it is.
We are able to see the
We
map.
can see it.
Great, thank you guys. They already know what it looks like. They don't need to see it. All right, great. So I'm gonna get rid of this since it already popped up. So you can see we've got the basins nice and outlined and a little dashed line to show the division of the two sub basins. And then we've got a few map layers that show up immediately. These are the we've got perennial streams, towns, and the basins. And then we've got our lake wise assessment awards and certificates and such all shown up. And then as well as the water quality monitoring. So these are just a few of the layers that we have available. Sorry, my dogs are a little itchy. So we've got this nice tab going down the side, and to view the rest of the map layers, you just have to click the second one down. That's like a stack of papers that looks like layers, and then it's labeled layers as well, where you can have access to more layers and be able to turn those on and off. So a lot of these map layers we just viewed in the presentation that we just went over. All those images of each basin were right here actually displayed on this map. So just to quickly go through how to utilize this, the layers will have this tiny little eyeball that hangs out next door, and it's to show visibility. So if I click on that eyeball, and it'll actually make the lake-wise assessments disappear. So if it is grayed out with a slash through it, then you don't have to view it anymore. So a lot of these are turned off in the beginning for sake of everything not just being popped up all at once and being really confusing maps. So you can feel free to turn on layers. So like this one is culverts. We can see we've got a lot of different culverts going on. If you want to know what those colors of the culverts mean, here, excuse me, I need to move you guys over. You have the symbology referenced on the side here. So if you weren't sure what, a red culvert meant, we've got, a poor way of describing it, sorry. And then for like AOP culverts, the same thing. If you want to know what the colors relate to, we've got, reduced AOP, meaning aquatic organism passage, all the way to like no aquatic organism passage. And then you can kind of work your way down. We've got culvert geomorphic compatibility. That's what Patrick was talking about. If, the stream can actually fit the culvert and actually, support the water flowing through. Bridges, dams, water quality monitoring sites with labels. So if you're unsure what those are called, they're right up on there. Stream bank assessments we've got here as well. And then SGA phase 2 assessments as well are here. Another really nifty thing is that we start off with this really pale background with a little bit of topography. If you want to change the background, you have that ability. So underneath layers, 2 blocks down, we have base maps. You can click on that and you have a whole slew of different base maps that you want. If you want, I would suggest using something with labels. It's very helpful, like hybrid imagery. It's really nice because it still shows up like towns and names of roads, so you can really orient yourself of where you're at. And then just to get back to the layers, click on those layers again. And if you want those to hide, you can just press the X. But yeah, we have just about everything here. It's nice to have perennial streams up. And then here, I'll close this one as well so we cannot be confused. So it's just nice to like get rid of things as you're not looking at them to make the map less confusing. We also have the ability to put ephemeral streams on there. So, you know, if you notice that there were some things missing, that's why there's some streams that aren't flowing throughout the year. Sorry, clicking too fast. And then we have, you know, road ownerships, road segments for priorities. Again, you can turn those on and then it'll show off the different sections along the roads that, you know, might need a little bit of work. And then you can open it up again if you wanted to check out what those symbols meant. Yep. So just a little bit of everything. All the layers just keep scrolling down. So feel free to like explore this, turn things on and off, see where you're at on the map, what things are around you. It's really nice. This is what we are utilizing to identify these projects and using as to help us scope out the area and identify those. And then, you know, yep, that's pretty much it. Patrick, do you think there's anything else that needs to be described here? Or do you guys have any questions about using this tool to kind of identify what we are identifying?
Got two things to add. One is at the bottom of that list are the property boundaries, which is particularly useful for us.
Oh yeah, thank you. My thing was
We
in
call those
the way.
parcels. And then the last thing is you can actually click on any dot or
Oh yeah, that's a
polygon.
good point.
It will tell you more information about that.
Yeah. So sometimes when you do click on it, it'll give you, it won't recognize what you're clicking on. So it'll ask you, is it this layer? This is just a point. And then you kind of just have to work your way through to see what the data is. This one is identifying, here, I'll get some culverts on there to make it look a little easier. Here we go. So if I zoom in and get a little bit closer, sorry if it's a little laggy. If you click on a point, it'll say 1 of 5. Just kind of sift through until you get to the point that you actually need. Here we go. For Valley Road, it has information about that, about the overall condition of the culvert. It has different, you know, measures on the measurements of the culverts and the type and where, just a lot of extra information. So if you need to know any of these, go ahead and click on some of the points and check that stuff out. Yeah.
So this map is hosted online and we may update it at some point, particularly when we have these proposed core assessment areas that we might add to it. But we really encourage you all to like poke through, you know, if you have an area that you are interested in us looking at, or your property or your neighbor's property or some brook that you like to fish on that is washing out, it would be really nice for you to share that information with us. And you can do that by taking a screenshot or a picture of the area on the map that you think we should look at, or better yet, come to the in-person meeting in July and you can tell us in person.
Can you guys imagine using that? Would it be useful to you? Maybe.
That's a good question. I would love to hear that.
Yeah.
Like, does anybody want to, you know, share like, you know, what they, you know, I don't know what your Saturday night looked like. What was that, Rhonda?
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. Wait, and then as we do assessments, does that data go into that, or that's more just what's already known?
So the assessment data will end up in the report and in the prioritization criteria. So just to reiterate, so we use this map to identify areas where we think we should do assessments. We use input from you all. We use conversations with Ben Copans and other people who know the lake and know the area. Then we get out and we do the assessments. We you know, take observations. You know, we find these project opportunities. We kind of sort them based on their potential to provide, you know, phosphorus reductions and other co-benefits. The co-benefits is what we really want to hear from you all. We want to know in July, you know, if invasive species is more of a priority for one lake versus, I don't know, public access and recreational access to another lake. You know, these are co-benefits that they're not necessarily water quality metrics, but they help us to prioritize and how to help to make recommendations. So we might make recommendations, but ultimately you all are going to tell us which projects you want to see designs.
So any questions about that? And again, the link is in the chat if you want to go ahead and grab it. And I'll include that in a follow-up email. So I will do a follow-up email. The other thing I wanted to create for you guys is like a one-pager that has this basic plan on it and what we're doing. So something you could hand out to neighbors or other community members you think might be interested. There was a question in the chat about the core assessment areas is streams, roads, and
Yeah, so Rhonda asked if the culverts that are on the maps are both public and private. I would hope that all the public culverts have been inventoried. Many of these are private culverts as well, but we may not have every single private culvert because it's pretty tall order.
Okay.
Rhonda also asked in the chat if the slides will be available, and I have that question too.
Yeah, we'll share Patrick's slides.
Yeah, we'd be happy to share the slides with the recording once. It'll take a couple days for the recording to sync, and then we can get all that information out to you.
Recording. Okay, show my final slide, at least for me.
Oh, yes. More slides for everybody.
I had a question for you guys. Holland was brought up as being a part of your watershed community. Just could you share with me about if you feel like there's enough residents of people that are part of town of Holland in the watershed? And I did try to reach out to the town office, and that was recommended from someone. Or does anyone have connections with residents that actually are in Holland?
There's a real small sliver, mostly I think just the top of Valley Road. So we want to include them, but they might feel like there's just not enough of, a footprint for them to feel like they should be.
Awesome. Can they see that?
You all can see Bevan's smiling face, right?
Yeah.
Me and Allison in there. Yeah, so the next meeting that's gonna be more of our work meeting is July 17th, and I will definitely figure out that location and get that out to you guys. Other next steps is you will be hearing from Abraham at some point for Lake Shoreline and Lake Wise assessments. And please do contact me. I think my email is in the chat as well. If you have any other ideas for outreach or anything else you want to share with me as the point of contact, I will do a follow-up email with the one pager and Patrick's slides and a sheet with the timeline and work plan. And any final thoughts? Abraham, do you want to say anything else about the Lake Wise assessments and Lake Shoreline?
Sure, I was just putting it in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me if you have a property you would like to have assessed. The way this is going to run is ideally we will go out and do a shoreline assessment, take a look at everything from a boat, figure out the priorities, the areas that might have potential projects, because really we want to focus our time on areas that are going to generate projects rather than areas where there's really not much to be done. So if you have a property that you would like assessed, feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, we will be honing in on properties which we would like to target. And once we have that list together, the way that I'm going to do that is touch base with you all, because between someone in the room or someone that we can probably get in contact with everyone who lives on the lakes. So that's the way we would like to run it. I'll reach out to you guys with a list. You guys let me know collectively who you have contacts with, and then I'll figure out from there who I need to contact personally. But like I said, the more that you guys can be involved and connect us with these landowners who may have meaningful projects on their property, the more bang for the buck that we're going to get for the LWAP, and the more that we'll be able to do. So I'm putting my email address in the chat. Feel free to email me.
I have another request, and that is to the Echo and Seymour Lake associations. If you could do some sort of email blast, whether it's with Bevan's follow-up email or whatnot. We're gonna be walking in the woods, and a lot of that involves crossing private lands. And typically I like to reach out to landowners before doing that. But that's not necessarily feasible at such a scale. And so where lands aren't posted, we're going to assume that access is allowable, particularly on current use properties.
But it would be really helpful if the lake associations could just kind of do like an email blast to your listservs, to your group memberships, and just say there are going to be people walking streams and walking roads and walking the lake shores, and they're not going to be these shady characters. They might be dressed in funny waders and vests, but we're going to be out there, and it's just a really good heads up. We had Westmore do it, and we didn't have any sort of negative interaction with landowners. In fact, one of our strongest suits is that when we're walking around and landowners see us, they're like, well, what you doing? And then we get to talk to them, and they point us in directions that we weren't going to head, and they find us projects, and they start building relationships, and they contribute to the conversation, and they bring things to the table. And that's really what we want. We want people to be engaged, and we want people to want to see us out on the landscape doing this work. So it'd be really helpful if we could get a little bit of assistance from that end from you all, because you have a pulse on everybody who is in the area.
Great. Well, any other questions or concerns or feedback for us?
Meeting location.
Oh yeah, the meeting location. I've gotten some suggestions for the meeting location, but yeah, feel free to throw some out now if you want. Any other questions in the chat?
Okay.
Over. Yeah. Cool. All right, everybody. Well, we hope to see you. Hope you'll join us on July 17th. And we appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you. And for all you do.
It's a long process, and there might be periods of no communication, but just know that we're working hard to figure out the best recommendations to make for you all. And we will try to have these regular scheduled check-ins so that you feel like you're involved in the progress. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you all.
Have a good evening.
You.
Take care, everyone.
I don't know the real side that is.